94% of the state still falling under extreme or exceptional drought, crop producers will, barring a miracle rainfall, begin the 2013 planting season with a sizable moisture deficit. But growers who have the benefit of irrigation, and that number is surely larger this spring, have the ability to provide water once the corn or soybean plant emerges. And this season, some may be thinking about starting their watering systems before the seed even goes in the ground. Derrel Martin talked with us earlier this week about why preseason irrigation might not be such a good idea, even though it may be tempting.
Well, people look out and they see that there hasn't been much rainfall over the last year or two, and so there's a temptation maybe to put some water down now to get ahead of the game, so to speak. Thing they have to realize that April, May, and June are our wettest months of the year in terms of rainfall. So it's very likely in the eastern part of the state that certainly in the eastern part of the state, we're going to receive enough rainfall to carry us through, maybe, so to speak.
We know that the rain-fed fields are probably drier than average, but in those irrigated fields, is it possible that some of that water is still left over from last season?
Yeah, sure. It all depends on how people ended up last season, where that irrigated field is at. I mean, I saw a lot of people, since it was so dry last summer, that were irrigating maybe a little bit later than normal. And those people may be in pretty good shape, quite frankly. Some people who maybe were a little limited on how much water they could pump, either because of an allocation or maybe a low well capacity, they may be a little bit drier this spring than normal. And so maybe some concern there to put some water in. But boy, a lot of the research shows it's not a real good strategy very often.
Let's go through a few of those, both in capacity and then in an allocation situation. Is there any way it would pay off in an allocation situation where you only can pump a certain number of inches per year?
Well, in those cases, I think I would be very, very careful with that. You know, the likelihood of getting some rain and then having some of the water you put on preseason irrigation maybe leads to that profile could be a real detriment to you. You're kind of losing your valuable resource doing that. So, you know, I'd be very careful in trying to do that, I think. The other areas, if you're really in low capacity wells, there's some research done by colleagues in Kansas, at Tribune, Kansas. And that's right on the Colorado-Kansas border. They get about 17 inches of rain a year. And they showed that if your capacity of your well is less than about 500 gallons a minute on a 130-acre pivot, that, you know, maybe there's a little bit of return to pre-irrigate. But if you had a larger capacity than that, then they weren't showing much benefit at all. And some likelihood that you're pumping water you wouldn't get any value out of.
Why isn't it working? Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it stay in that soil profile?
Well, it may, again, April, May, and June
Okay.
are our wettest months of the year, and so if we get the rain and it fills the profile up.
So it's not that it's not staying there, it's just that you might get that water anyway.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
That's right. Exactly, that's right.
Is there any difference between if you're thinking about doing this, is there any difference between planting beans and corn? Because obviously corn is going to need more water right away, most likely.
Yeah, corn's probably going to be a little more sensitive to preseason irrigation, although corn's a very tough crop. Both crops are pretty tough. So it might be a little bit more beneficial to pre-irrigate on the corn than the soybeans. But certainly the eastern half of the state, I don't see much likelihood of it being worthwhile. What we really encourage people to do is take a soil probe and go out and probe in that field down 2-3 feet, 4 if they can get there, and look at that soil water maybe in the first part of June. Generally, we have enough capacity in our wells to be able to put some water down early in June before we hit that peak use period. And by then, we'll know a lot more about what our precipitation looks like before the season starts.
What do you want to see in that profile? How much water do you want to see in there?
Well, you know, and again, that's going to depend on the capacity
Sure.
of your well. If you have a really nice capacity well, you know, we'd like to be up to 75% of field capacity. We'd like to leave room for any rain that we would get in June. If we have a little low capacity well, I would like to end up June pretty close to field capacity in those fields if I have a really low capacity well.
Final question, if there isn't rain in your area before planting season, I think there maybe would be a temptation to put a little water down to make sure that you're not planting into an absolutely dry seed bed. Is there any argument for that?
Well, we hear a lot of that. A lot of times, again, I think it's marginal in terms of its payback. Some of that's going to depend on how you till. If you're in a reduced tillage system, it's probably pretty likely that you're going to have some good soil moisture at the surface. If you happen to be in a tillage situation for some reason, and maybe you've dried those top inch or two out, then it's a little more likely that it'd be beneficial to you. But generally speaking, it's not a good gamble, especially again in eastern Nebraska.